Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, a podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm Lizzie Elston and you're listening to episode number 30, where we ask, are women rewriting the rules? Well, hello and welcome to this episode of The Green Room. It's a particularly exciting episode today. I've been really looking forward to this. It's an International Women's Day special. We are asking, are women rewriting the rules? And what a brilliant question that is. Do you know what they say, Ethan?
What do they say, Lizzie?
They say it's a man's world. And so we're going to have a look at that today. It's good to have you here, Ethan, hosting with me. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Lizzie. I'm excited to be part of another Lizzie Ethan special.
Absolutely.
And excited to be here to celebrate International Women's Day. I think as somebody who grew up in a household of rule-breaking women, I feel honoured to share this episode with yourself and our accomplished guests.
Indeed. And on that note, Ethan, who have we got joining us today?
So we have Katie Houldsworth. Katie is an audit partner and leader of our South East Public Audit Group. She leads on a number of audits and supports other partners in their delivery of high-risk, complex audits. Katie also runs the Deloitte Women on Boards programme in the UK. In 2020, she was an individual winner of the TimeWise Power 50 Awards, celebrating how she makes a success of flexible working. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Ethan, and hi, Lizzie. Really delighted to be here today.
Lovely to have you here.
We're also joined by Suzie de Rohan Willner. She's the CEO of Toast, the retail brand that aspires to a slower, more thoughtful way of life. Suzie is specialised in purpose-driven leadership and business transformation. She was listed in the Kindness and Leadership 50 Leading Lights 2018 cohort and is Ambassador of Women of the Future and Asian Women of Achievement Awards. Hi, Suzie.
Hello, Ethan. Hello, Lizzie. Hi, Katie. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you here. It's a great topic that we're going to be talking about today. And to what I said earlier about it being a man's world. I mean, some say that's a bit of a joke. Some say it out of frustration. But I guess it'll be interesting to have a think about how true that really is. But before we get into that topic, I'm delighted to say, Suzie and Katie, that we have an icebreaker to get us warmed up. So, Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, as is tradition in these virtual calls, I think one's going to pop into my screen. Okay, so who would play you in a movie about your life?
Oh, that's an interesting one. That is an interesting one. So I think this is Katie here, and I would have to go for probably Kate Winslet. She's a similar age to me. I think she's a great actress. She's a family woman as well as a career individual, and we've got the same first name as well.
Perfect. I like that one. What about you, Suzie?
I definitely see that. That's a good shout. How about you, Suzie?
I'm going to take Christian Scott Thomas as my actor or actress. Only because my husband thinks she's gorgeous, and often she has short hair like mine. I think she'd be perfect. She's
great. Yeah, I've always liked her. She's in the same camp as Emma Thompson to me. That sort of same sort of school of.
I was thinking Emma Thompson.
Yes,
very good. I'll take either. Gorgeous.
Yeah. Come on, Ethan. Who would play you?
So, this is a hard one. I think I was going to go less life parallel and more who just kind of has similar mannerisms to me. So I think
who's that?
I'd like to think Ashton Kutcher, but I think I'd be flattering myself a bit there. I have been told I look like the main character in Lion. I can't remember his name, but I think I pull some of those kind of expressions where he has his mouth open a bit and he often looks a bit confused and lost. So I think I'd probably go with him. I might give him a quick Google while you're answering it. What about you, Lizzie?
Oh gosh, I'm struggling a bit here, but sometimes something comes to mind because you've just thought about it recently. And in preparation for this podcast, I was looking at some of these videos that come up, which where Hollywood leading ladies are asked questions which perhaps their male counterparts would never be asked. And there's a whole video that's been put together, these ridiculous questions they get asked. And Jennifer Garner was asked, now that you're a mother, how are you going to balance being a mother in the film industry? And she said, well, I don't think you've asked that question of my husband, who was Ben Affleck. And I thought, well, you're spot on. And I like to think, I'm not entirely different looking from Jennifer Garner. I mean, what's she got that I haven't? So there we go. That's my answer.
And mine was Dev Patel, by the way. That was
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. I like it. Well, we've got through the icebreaker. So time to get stuck into the big question. So let's just open up, first of all, getting to know you, our guests, a little bit better. You're both successful women in business. It'd be great to hear a bit more about your career to date, just to help our listeners get to know you. Suzie, should we start with you?
Yes, lovely, thank you. I started my career working in France for the Timberland brand, and I started at the reception, which makes my journey quite a long one. I've had huge opportunities across different roles in the organisation. Moved from Timberland to Levi Strauss in Belgium, worked across Europe and then internationally, both at Levi Strauss and then after that at Puma. And then I took a decision to move out of a more corporate brand environment to the FitFlop brand. Where I was CEO working with Marcia Kilgore, the entrepreneur. An incredible experience that I loved, working with a driven entrepreneur and building the global business, inculcating there a culture that was new to the business. And then I left and I wanted to do something slightly different. I thought, I've got all of this wonderful experience from corporate and the entrepreneurial experience, and I wanted to make a difference and give back. And I wanted to find a brand that gave me the possibility to do that. And I joined Toast in 2015.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzie. What an interesting career, and looking forward to hearing more as we get through the episode. Katie, a bit about yourself.
So I have spent 25 years at Deloitte, which is almost the polar opposite to Suzie's experience. I joined Deloitte in 25 years ago. This is my 26th year, actually, straight from university, having done a maths and physics degree, where at the time where there wasn't really sort of the internet widely available, I went to my careers advisor and said, what shall I do? And he said, you've got three choices, having done a maths degree. You can be a teacher, you can stay in education, or you can be an accountant. And I remember thinking, well, my dad had said, I'm not going to give you any more money, so I better go and get a job. And so I went and thought I'd become an accountant. And that's kind of where it started, which wasn't necessarily a burning desire to sort of do this role at the start. And 25 years later, I'm still here, which means for me that what I've had is a different year every time. Right. There's been different teams that I've worked with in Deloitte. There's been different audits that I've worked on, different clients, different industries. I've worked with different client personnel. When a CEO and a CFO change, it can often really change the culture of a business. And that's been really interesting to see. And I've also had the opportunity to do quite a lot of different roles within Deloitte, talent leadership roles, roles around innovation and helping us to think about the audit of the future. And for the last couple of years, whilst my day job is to be an audit partner, predominantly for listed companies, I've had the great opportunity to run a group of about 650 people, which has been really interesting, particularly in the situation we've been in the last year. But also alongside that, run our Women on Boards programme. And I took that over 3 years ago as part of our senior boardroom relationships team. And that's something that I guess you could say I do side of desk, but it's something that I really passionately enjoy, around helping women to think about their career, to take a step away from their day job and to challenge themselves on whether there is a role for them potentially stepping onto boards in the future.
Fantastic. And Suzie, you have experience of the Women Boards programme, I think, yourself.
Brilliant opportunity. It's I was very lucky. I think you have to be named to go on the Women on Board programme. I see Katie nodding. So yes, I was very lucky. I lived next door to Katie. We met, we talked a few times about what we were achieving, and she nominated me. And here I find myself on this incredible journey. We've had 2 so far. I've heard experienced chairs talk to us about their highs, their lows, and give us some really practical tips that I don't think I'd ever have exposure to. Very helpful. You also have this invaluable network, and that is something we as women need to do more of. Meet other women, share experiences, help each other. Very much like the Women of the Future program, Asian Women of Achievement. It's all about networking, helping each other, and specifically with Women of the Future, helping younger women out of school, universities, and giving them your time.
It's fantastic. And we might talk a bit more about the programme in a bit in terms of why it's so important. But just before we get into that, it would be helpful to get your views on the fact that, breaking into male-dominated industries is challenging. And I'd be interested in any rules or norms that you've had to challenge to get to where you are.
So I guess one of the things I might share is when I was coming up to the partner process at Deloitte. So I've been a partner for 14 years. And I guess in terms of that rules and norms to challenge, I remember doing a practice presentation with a very senior partner who was someone that I'd known and worked with for a long time. And I was practicing my interview, and I sort of turned up to this practice and I talked him through, and he was really quiet throughout and he listened, really focused. And at the end, he said to me, he said, "That was really interesting, Katie." He said, "You've come dressed in a very different outfit." He said, "You've used lots of really long words." He said, "You've used convoluted sentences, and you've been very serious throughout this last hour." And he said, "I've worked with you for years." And he said, "It just didn't feel like you." And it was really interesting. I reflected at the time that what I was doing was trying to be what I thought a partner in Deloitte should look like, what I thought an audit partner in Deloitte should sound like, what I thought an audit partner in Deloitte should dress like. And that partner, what he did, just by sort of challenging that, and one of the things he said to me is that one of my strengths is to explain really complex matters simply. He did say that I did it very well in words of less than 2 syllables in most conversations. But he said, you explain things really simply. And he said, and you also take people with you. You take people with you on that sort of journey you're on, and you take people with you. And he said, you didn't sound like you. And he encouraged me to, I guess, to think about, there isn't necessarily a norm for a Deloitte partner. And whilst, 15 years ago, you might look around and think, well, it looks like there's one. He was trying to say to me, I think, be yourself, be authentic to who you are. And it's not to say in certain situations, I don't take myself more seriously and I don't prepare really hard. When I'm talking to a FTSE 100 board about some of the challenges they're facing, you don't turn up unprepared, you turn up very prepared, you are more serious, but you can still bring that element of you to the table. And I think, just as a small example, that would be one of the rules and norms that I've looked to challenge and to sort of take with me and to share with others over the years, that you can be yourself. And you don't have to try to be someone that you're not.
Yeah, and
wise words.
Yeah, I think it's great that you were able to reflect on that and be told that in fact being yourself is the way forward. But I imagine probably the reason that was your go-to is you've experienced before in your life that sometimes you do have to act a certain way or act in a way that you feel is unnatural to fit a certain expectation, I expect.
Yeah. And I guess, and we may come to this into the future, but, I spent a lot of my junior career in a room with a lot of men. Most of the men were more senior than me. And so therefore, the people that I was starting to take, pointers from as to how I might look or dress or sound were perhaps quite different to me. And that's perhaps something we'll come on to, Ethan, but that links to that scenario.
Yeah. And Suzie, how about you? If you had to challenge any norms, break any rules to get to the top?
I echo Katie. I started my career working for the 2 American brands I worked for were customer focused on men. the majority of the organizations, both Timberland and Levi Strauss, were male. And here I was, a young mum, working in this. Most of the time I was the girl in the room. And I think as I discovered that I loved what I did, and I became quite intense. And I suspect, like many women, the more I enjoyed, the more I focused and became quite obsessive about doing a great job. And it made me quite a brute. You know, I became quite masculine in the way I approached this very competitive environment. And looking back, I can remember, like Katie, kind men coming up to me and giving me hints to be myself. You know, they could see that. And eventually, I think when I moved over to the United Kingdom and joined FitFlop, I took on a life coach. I finally worked out how I was going to navigate by bringing more of me in to the work environment and be myself. And, you know, I've always been someone who enjoys giving, and I'm a caring person, but I cut that off. I was so professional, and bringing me in, suddenly I found this far more balanced persona that I was comfortable with. And that's just grown from strength to strength. And now I think I come to work every day and I can be an authentic self. And I can still be driven, but on the other side of that, I can be thoughtful, intuitive, and really support and develop the people that I work with.
And do you think in those kind of earlier stages in your career where you were working really hard, going above and beyond, do you think expectation was higher on you as a woman, or as one of few women in the department?
I don't know if it was higher, Ethan. I think as I said, I started off at the reception. There were no pressure on me at all. I was a young mum, and you know, I was the only salary earner in the family, so it was very important that I took money home. And I learned that I loved what I did, and I loved driving change. So I don't think anyone put expectation on me, but I grew an appetite for new challenges. And like Katie at Levi's, I was given many different opportunities. Every year was a new wonderful opportunity. And I think I worked out that I could be challenged, and I was promoted quite swiftly through the organization by taking on these areas that no one else wanted to go near, but I loved because they were different. I don't think there was pressure on me. I do think that I felt I had to work much, much harder to get noticed. And I probably didn't understand that just working hard wasn't good enough, that actually being able to voice my opinions, shape the conversation, have impact, was equally as important. I didn't know that, and I didn't have any role models to explain that to me.
I've had a similar experience, Suzie, as well, actually, around that. I also had a really strong work ethic, and I want to do well at what I try to do. And that only gets you so far. And I think that's absolutely right. That confidence in voicing your views, realizing that it's not just working harder and longer hours, is something that I think that I learned along the way. But it doesn't come to you straight away, does it? And even now, sometimes I find myself thinking, well, I'm just going to finish this, or if I do this really well, you know, and you have to remind yourself it's not just about the time that you put in that makes you successful.
It reminds me of the episode we did with Sharon Thorne on imposter syndrome and Poppy Jaman, because one of the points that came up there about imposter syndrome is that sense of, I've got something I want to say, but I'm not entirely sure whether it will be the right thing to say. So I'll just hold back for now. And then, of course, some chap or someone else speaks up and says exactly what you were going to say. And I guess over time you realise that, you know, it's absolutely right to be able to express those views with confidence. But like you say, Katie, it's not always something that comes immediately.
And I think that was a great episode, actually. I loved that episode. And I've known Sharon for a really long time. And actually there was things I didn't know about her that she shared in that episode, which was fantastic to hear. But the other experience I've had is if I've said something in meetings, perhaps in not a very confident way, is that sometimes people then repeat that with a slightly different twist on it. And everybody goes, oh, yes, that's a great idea. And I've definitely had that, which again reminds me to give, actually, if I hear in a room or in a meeting, someone give a view in a perhaps underconfident way to try and encourage them to bring that out more. And also to sort of stop someone then claiming the credit by just saying it in a different way that's a bit more confident, which, it does happen. It really does.
Yeah.
It happens more often than we think. And don't you find it's important quite early to work out how to elegantly take back the thought? And because otherwise that escalates into other areas of your life. So once you can do that, once you give yourself permission to take it back, it changes people's behaviour around the boardroom table.
So on the subject of the boardroom, so we were talking earlier about the Women on Boards programme, Katie, that you lead, and Suzie, that you experience. Why is it important to have more women in senior leadership positions?
I guess, the Women on Boards programme came about 10 years ago after the Hampton-Alexander Review. And that was a review of boards, and it basically realised that when you looked at boards in the UK, women were significantly underrepresented. And a target was set to achieve a certain percentage of women on boards, and it's most measurable in the FTSE 350 because they have to report who their boards are, who their independent and non-independent directors are, and you can measure it quite simply. And so, I've seen, I wasn't involved 10 years ago. I was lucky enough to take it over 3 years ago when it had already been sort of set up and was running. But we have seen that the number of women on boards has increased. And in fact, Hampton-Alexander announced this year at the end of last year, they'd met the target had been met at approximately 30%. But there are still some boards with what we might call one and done, which is one woman, and that's it. And the other area,
the HR director.
Yeah. And then the other area that I think is really interesting to observe is that the number of executive positions on boards, so that might be a CEO like Suzie is or a CFO, is still very underrepresented in terms of the percentage. So there's definitely been an improvement in terms of non-exec directors joining boards. But in terms of those who are in senior executive positions, there still remains, in my view, a significant gap there in terms of people, of women in those positions. And I think from my perspective, I always felt at Deloitte that I could achieve, but I know that I learn from others. I learn from seeing people, I learn from hearing stories, and I take inspiration from that, and I create ideas from that, and I add behaviors to my toolbox, which I imaginarily carry with me wherever I go. And so I don't think that it means that if there aren't women in senior leadership positions that you can see, I don't think it means that you can't succeed. But I think what it does is it can help you to have others there that you can see and that you can, role models. I'm sure we'll come on to role models, but having role models and having sort of senior female role models, I think, can encourage and give other ideas to people.
I think, as you mentioned, that the FTSE 350 has only just met their target. And I guess I've kind of got two questions here. So one around how you as senior female leaders are ensuring the spaces that you create are fair and equal for other women, but then also keen for it not to just be on you. I think we did an episode recently around the experience of some of our Black colleagues. And I think although they can help drive the agenda, I think it's everyone needs to drive the agenda. So what can businesses do in general to help lift the women in their organisation up?
I believe passionately in coaching next generation of leaders. And so at Toast, we are coaching all the time. We have a mentorship program. We are predominantly female across the organization. So where we're not so good is on racial equality. And that's something we, over the past year, we've really looked at ourselves very seriously in the mirror and decided we have a program. And so from now on, we look for a diversity in everything we do, whether that's photographic contribution or content or hiring. And it's changing the way we're behaving, which is a really, really good thing. I think that when it comes to promoting women, I spend a lot of time in schools. That's where I believe we need to start. So I will go out for Women of the Future and speak in schools around the country. It gives me great energy. And I think for these young people to hear a CEO and hear my story inspires them and gives me huge energy. I enjoy helping.
I think from a Deloitte perspective and my role, I see that I've got a few ways that I can make sure that we're creating spaces that are fair and equal, as you mentioned, Ethan. I think that I've got to challenge myself personally around thinking about the teams that I create around me and thinking about the people that I sort of bring onto my teams. The way that we work is I have different teams working for me on different clients. So I might have a number of different teams, and I try and challenge myself to make sure I'm not picking the obvious person, that I'm also bringing on people who've maybe they've maybe not quite got as much experience, but it's something I could help them with, for example. And also thinking about that more widely, not only about gender actually, but to Susie's point, that have we got the right balance of sort of diversity on those teams? I think that, I sometimes reflect and look at my teams and think, well, most of my senior directors are women. And so maybe I've got, am I going too far? But I think it's important. And I think all of us should take away that as a sort of an action to challenge ourselves on who we have on our teams working for us. And I think from a wider perspective, when we're looking at promoting and we're looking at who are coming through to our next level of directors in Deloitte and our next level of partners in Deloitte, again, we have to challenge ourselves on making sure we've got, the right balance from a gender and a diversity perspective. So I think there's a lot of things that I look to get involved in to try to ensure that there is equality there, that we're promoting people when they're ready. So we're not promoting people that aren't ready, we're promoting people when they're ready, but we're promoting people, trying to make there's a good balance.
Did you know at Deloitte we buy goods and services from social enterprises, which contributes to our 5 Million Futures programme? From Babies with Love sells beautiful gifts for babies and gives the profits to orphaned and abandoned children around the world. Their ethically sourced designs help vulnerable children to grow up in a safe, happy place. Do you know someone who is expecting? Why not treat them with a gift from babieswithlove.org? Now back to our topic of the day.
I think one of the anecdotes that our producer gave us before this call was that actually when asking you to represent powerful women on this podcast, I think you both questioned whether you were the right person for this podcast. And I think it's interesting because we've never had that with a male guest. And I think it kind of illustrates what you said about being hard on yourself.
I think it does. I think that it is a prime example of women thinking, am I good enough to do that for them? Will I do a good enough job? And then I'm sure we both prepared in depth. And of course, we're fully equipped to be talking to you today. We've got extensive careers. We both traveled around the world. I think, it's a good example.
And some of the research I did into this podcast highlighted the disproportionate effects on women that the pandemic has had, particularly across the globe. And also within the West. I think that's partly due to the sectors in which they work. So as you mentioned, retail, as well as frontline healthcare. And then also in terms of the unpaid care work that they do and the additional burden of homeschooling and how quite often, although always, of course, not always the case, but quite often they're taking on a greater burden of that in the household. So I just wondered if that's something that you have felt personally, or if that's something that you're finding in your employees.
I'm delighted you've asked that question. I'm smiling, a broad smile here, because I'm finding in my own household, there's a tendency, I don't know about you, Katie, but here there's a tendency to, there's a tendency for my husband, who's working upstairs, he runs a design architect company, he expects meals from me. and as Katie knows, I actually don't cook. So suddenly I've been thrown into this role, and I do feel, and I've read about this, that I suddenly feel like somebody who hasn't got a job, and I'm expected to serve and 3 meals a day. And I've never done that ever in my life. So I wonder how that's happened. I've challenged it, and we've come to a mutual agreement now that we're just going to share the responsibility. However, when I look at my organization or the team, yes, I think that it is often quite challenging for the mothers, and they, we have an open policy where if children want to bounce onto our Zoom calls, they're most welcome, and we'll all have a chat with them. I've got one lovely mum in Swansea who has a child who's learning his ABC, and when she's at home alone, he sits singing the ABC, and she doesn't. And when she turns off mute and comes live, she doesn't want to stop the child singing ABC because they've asked him to do so. So it's a lovely example of how we are learning to be inclusive and open to different. I had one chap in the organisation who was very worried about the child coming on the screen. He was alone at home. His wife had a job, and I noticed he kept turning off his screen. And I had to make a point of it. It's absolutely okay. We all have to embrace this moment. So yes, I believe it's making a difference to roles. We have to challenge that. But likewise, I understand. I heard some numbers recently that in retail, the number of women in senior roles is declining over the last 18 months. And that shocked me. I thought this would be a moment where actually our skills would come to the fore. And I think Katie mentioned this earlier. There's something here around maybe for some women, if they are taking on more responsibility at home, they have less appetite for change right now. And that could be the case. And that is going to put us back a step.
It's really interesting, Suzie, isn't it? And I think, we have found ourselves at, Deloitte, having gone from being in the office and client sites all the time to I've been in this room that I'm in now for nearly 12 months now. Yeah. And I managed to get into the office for a couple of days in September to see some teams and to see some clients. But, it's been incredibly difficult to have that interaction. From a personal perspective, I've got 12-year-old twins, and I have a daughter who is autistic and has learning difficulties. And so it's been challenging from a personal perspective for me as well. I remember when the first lockdown happened, I was sitting thinking, and I called my boss to say, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. I really don't know how I'm going to make this work. And I'm sure I'm not the only person, I know I'm not the only person who's been in that situation. I'm lucky that my children are a little bit older. But I'm also lucky that we've been able to find some care to support us, particularly support our daughter. Our son doesn't need a lot, but we don't have care before 10 and we don't have to care after 4, and my husband goes to work. And so, I have been in that same situation that Suzie mentioned with, my daughter coming in. The dog's actually the worst offender. If she can hear me in the room with the door shut, she barges down the door. And I think that it has made us more human. I was on a FTSE 100 board call and the dog was barking outside the door, and I was continuing in a very serious way until the CEO said, "Katie, why don't you let the dog in and then continue?" To which everybody broke into peals of laughter. And I continued the call with this sort of big Labrador right next to me wagging her tail. And I think it has made, like Suzie said, I think that it has broken down and made things perhaps more personal in an environment where we aren't physically seeing people. But I do think that the pressure on some of our people who, particularly at Deloitte, but more widely, who have young children who need a lot of support, who have caring responsibilities, who are on their own, who live in shared houses, I think this has this pandemic has had a significant impact on people. And I think in particular, you know, women, perhaps it's our nature, going back to the point that we talked about earlier about wanting to kind of do the best that we can. You know, I think in a number of instances, women are taking on perhaps, you know, the lion's share of things, and need to have that conversation, Suzie, that you referenced, to think about how we work things through together. But it's definitely brought up challenges that I've never had to deal with in a leadership position, and that I've never had to deal with at home, actually. You know, which I've had to sort of personally work through. And coming back to the piece I mentioned earlier, a lot of people learn and recognize that things are okay through hearing stories and hearing personal examples of what people have done. And I think one of the things I try to do in a leadership position is not to feel uncomfortable to say that I've done something wrong, or to share some of those stories of how I've been able to cope. And I like to think that that gives people ideas, male or female, on how they might sort of manage in certain situations. By the way, I don't have the answer to everything by any means. And when I got downstairs yesterday to find 2 family-sized bags of crisps next to my daughter while she was watching telly and telling me she wasn't hungry for tea,
Yeah, funny that
made me feel particularly proud of that parenting moment. But you've just got to move on.
It's interesting talking about, you know, a lot of us as mothers, you know, the children make an appearance on Zoom. That certainly happened to me. But, you know, it is also wonderful when we do see our male colleagues in the same situation. I was on a Zoom call, and one of our male directors had his 2-year-old asleep on his lap. And, you know, it's things like that actually, you know, men, you can help this. share these stories yourself. Let us see, you know, your life as well. I mean, actually, on that note, I think it's a really important point to make that you know, we need our male allies in this in this whole quest to equality. And in fact, I know that the Women's Network at Deloitte is really encouraging men to get involved, to sponsor the programme, to come along to events. What would be your message to our men out there who are listening and wondering how they can get involved and support what we're trying to do?
I think it's interesting when you're talking about rewriting the rules or trying to do things in a different way. I think one of the things I'd say is it's hard to do that on your own without perhaps sort of bouncing ideas or talking to people or having that coach or that sponsorship. And through my career, when I've made, I think, changes that perhaps outside the norm or things that I've tried to do in a different way, when I look back on that, in many instances, it's been male colleagues or men that I work with that I've bounced some of these ideas off to get their buy-in, or to make sure that I've, you know, thought about all of the different areas and facets of it. And so I think that our male colleagues, you know, some of the people who've been the best sponsors to me over my career have been male colleagues. And so, you know, those that put their hands up to sort of support either formally in our female mentoring program or informally, and just thinking about those who work for them, I think, you know, you can make a big difference, because often we come at things in a different way. I chose to go part-time about 3 years ago now. And a lot of people do that if they maybe have small children. Actually, my children were 9, nearly 10 when I chose to go part-time. And even though I'd been a partner for 10 years, I still felt a little bit uncomfortable about it, because there weren't many partners in that position. And actually quite a lot of the advice I had was, well, you know, just sort of be agile and flex your hours. But I wanted to reduce my hours. I wanted to spend more time, you know, able to sort of deal with some of the challenging situation we have at home. And I wanted to sort of feel able and ready to do that. And I think I built it into something that was bigger than it really was. And I remember talking to a colleague about it, and he was sort of like, well, it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? Don't you just sort of, you know, you thought it through. He said, you've thought it through from start to finish. He said, you've got a really clear plan. He said, it's not really a big thing, is it? And I said, well, it is a big thing. It's a big thing to me. And he said, yes, but you've done all the preparation. You're ready to sort of go ahead with it. And so, you know, he gave me some confidence. So I think coming back to some of the things that our male colleagues can do, it's you know, in the way that they can coach male or female, you know. And I think that sometimes picking someone who is or working with someone who is a bit different to you can be a really good thing, because it helps you to look at things in a different way.
I echo that. I love the men who have supported me through my career have been really very, very helpful in guiding me, and above all in helping me to lighten up. So, we've got a little fella behind you there. Sorry, Lizzie. But that's a lovely example. How nice.
Almost like it was planned.
You see, the problem was that Oliver, my 8-year-old, made an appearance on the last podcast, so I think he feels that
He's part of the show.
Is it time for me?
So I find I choose men as friends, as mentors, for support, who serve different purposes, because we all have to know what our strengths are, but also our weaknesses. We've said that. And once we can embrace all of those lovely facets, I like to seek men who make me laugh and lighten me up, and they can look at the funny side of what I'm experiencing. And that's helpful. It makes me less perfectionist.
So you spoke briefly about some of your male role models, and I guess that you as two very successful women are probably role models to others around you. Does it ever get tiring having to kind of be that role model and empower other women? Do you ever feel like, oh, not today, kind of thing?
So that's a really good question, Ethan. I mean, I was the most senior female in my group for quite a long time, actually, on the run up to partner. So this is a long, long time ago. And, you know, I remember when I made partner and I had twins, I was rolled out and asked to do lots and lots of things, to talk about how I could make it work, how I was managing. And, you know, from a personal perspective, I don't necessarily see it as a responsibility. I see it as something that I want to do to make women feel empowered, to make women to sort of share stories. As I said, that's how I learn personally. So sharing those stories for me is something that I'm really happy to do, because I think that I've heard so many times people say to me, oh, when you mentioned this, it made me think about something. And so I enjoy doing that sort of thing. I enjoy bringing myself to work. I'm sure I've got team members who have said to me before, Katie, can you just stop now? Because I'd really like to get some work done. So, I mean, I'm very open to that as well, by the way. So, you know, I'm quite comfortable doing that. But there's been certain times when you're right, when you've been really busy or just exhausted, like when I came back from having the twins, and I was asked to do a session about sort of being a working parent of young children. And I sort of paused and I said, do you think John could do it? He had a little girl at the same time as me, and he's doing very similar things to me. He's working full time, but he's going home a couple of evenings a week. He was really open about it and he was delighted to do it. And so I also think that one of the things that we have to do at times is, you know, look after ourselves to protect our own sort of well-being, and also to seek others that we can put into the position where they get the opportunity to share their stories. And so that's something that I look to try to do, Ethan, to sort of to protect my own well-being and my time. But on the whole, it's the sort of thing I really enjoy doing. Sort of, I guess, informal coaching or supporting people and sharing stories is for me something that I enjoy doing. And I think it's important for people to hear.
Definitely. How about you, Suzie?
I love supporting people. It gives me huge energy. So I will, and it gives me another perspective. I think I get as much out of people that I am mentoring, or just young people, having a chat with them. I learn as much from them as hopefully I'm giving. So I'll do that. I'll make space in the mornings for breakfast. I will. I'll go out to schools. Women of the Future is a big part of my life. I'll go out to as many of those events as possible. And if there's a mentoring opportunity, I'll take someone under my wing. But I am absolutely with Katie. There are times when I have become exhausted and I'm trying to juggle too many plates. And last year, I took a step back for a few months. And I felt so incredibly guilty. I felt the heavy weight of, I am not doing my bit. But of course we are. and taking that step back is also our responsibility. I have a team of 250 people that also rely on me having energy and coming on the top of my game every day, you know. So it goes back to be kind to ourselves and look after our own well-being. But I believe it is an incredibly important thing that we do share our stories. So it is lovely to hear Katie's story. If I was listening to this, I think that I would take so much out of it. And I don't think I had this. So the simple, practical permission to appreciate that other women share our anxieties, that we're also that we also are obsessive, that we have to put in place tools to look after ourselves. All of these things are important that we share and help the next generation.
Absolutely, and you are both fabulous role models, and you know, mustn't underestimate the impact that you have on people who are hearing your stories. It's so important, and that goes obviously across not just gender but race and all areas. To hear these stories makes such a difference to people. On the subject of role models, I wonder, who would your female role models be?
Shall I go first, Suzie? So Suzie and I did have a giggle about this the other day, actually, about the fact that it wasn't that straightforward to think of many. And I can think of lots of people throughout the years who've helped me and support me, but I have come up with two. And one of them actually is our global chair, Sharon Thorne. She recruited me in the Manchester office in 1993. And she was a senior manager at the time. And she was looking to try to get more women into that office, which had no female partners at that time. It was a small office at the time. And she and I have kept in touch throughout our careers. And, you know, one of the things that I found really inspiring about her is her honesty. And I find that really inspiring. And that Green Room podcast about imposter syndrome really sort of rung true in a number of areas. And the fact that as our global chair, she felt confident in talking about that is something that I certainly see. The other one that I would raise is probably my mum, but I'm also going to put in brackets my dad as well. I'm very similar to my dad, and both my parents in their 40s completely changed their careers. They went back to university. My dad did an MBA. My mum did a master's in innovation in the early 90s. And they both completely changed their careers. You know, mum had 4 children and wanted to have a career and wanted to be busy. She's now a model railway influencer. I mean, I could talk about that for hours, but I'm not going to.
We need to get her on the podcast.
She's on many things, Lizzie. But she, you know, in her 70s, that's what she's doing. And my dad was a natural integrator, and his style and ways of dealing with sort of conflict and difficulties is something that I've taken with me as well. So without wanting to be too sort of, you know, I think I would say Sharon, and then I'd also say, you know, my mum, brackets, and my dad.
Fantastic. Suzie, what about yourself?
I love that story about your mum. The first person on my list is Pinky Lalani, founder of Women of the Future, an exceptional woman who has built an incredible organization that is, it is so broad. And despite all the numbers of people that come through that organization, you will often find an invitation from Pinky to her home for Sunday lunch, where you sit there and have her beautiful Indian cooking, and you meet lovely women of all ages, and it's an absolute delight. And most importantly, Pinky encourages everyone to walk around and mingle and meet. You need to be helping at least 3 people at every single lunch, and I love that approach to helping others. My second one is Maya Angelou, the American poet, civil rights activist. I find her often uplifting to read when I need an uplift. She says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, they will never forget how you make them feel. And a good reminder to me. And finally, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the USA, a fighter, a woman in a man's world who so elegantly made a difference for all of us.
R.I.P. the notorious RBG.
Exactly.
What a woman. I also think that my mum would be on my list, Katie, as well.
Can I just make a shout out to my mum, because I just feel really bad now that listening to this and everyone's talking about their parents. So shout out to my parents, who are also fabulous. And then just to finish off a bit here, we've talked a lot about roles at work and balance home, but there's a lot more obviously to all of us than work and home life. It'd be interesting to hear about some aspects of your life that you're really proud of outside of the confines of work.
I'm smiling here because I'm so incredibly proud of the role I played as a mother, and that I've been able to raise two beautiful children. I started off being the money earner, and it was very hard. And over the years, I had to travel around the world and leave my little ones. That was hard. There was huge guilt. They've turned out very, very well indeed. They are both happy, balanced individuals. I love their company. They live within 15 minutes of me here. We're a very close-knit family. I am also proud that I've managed to communicate to both of them a need for support of each other and support of women in the workplace, and an honouring of a sensitivity in men in the workplace, that this is all good and this is how we should be with each other, rather than necessarily competitive. It's more about helping each other. So good business is more than making money, and giving back to community. So they both share strong values. They're both successful in their careers, and I'm very proud of them.
Fantastic. Katie?
So it's really interesting, isn't it? I think, I would look at sort of the last 25 years and think, what has made me really, really proud? I think there's a few things that spring to mind. One of them was actually getting to partner at Deloitte. I don't even think that was something that I was going to do, even probably in the year or so before I made partner. And I think that, I was very proud to get that promotion. I think we don't always pause and reflect on how proud we are of points along our career. We've just had a number of people who've passed their first set of exams. They joined in January and they're doing them remotely. And actually, they should be incredibly proud of being able to achieve that. And so I think we do have to recognise those achievements along the way. So that would be one of them. I think the other one I'd say is sort of the family that my husband and I have created. And we've not got to the point where I can step back yet, Suzie, and say they're a well-adjusted pair. And I have my fears and moments when I think, oh my goodness, where are we going with this? But I'm proud of where we've got to so far. It means a lot to me, my husband's support for me and for our family, and me for his. And we've got a way to go, and we've got some things to navigate through, that's for sure. But I'm proud of where we've got to so far.
You are great fun. Am I allowed to say this? They are great fun as parents.
That's brilliant. Lucky kids. Suzie and Katie, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I've so enjoyed this conversation. I think it's probably a good time to bring it to a close with, I guess, our final question, which is, are women rewriting the rules? Maybe in a couple of sentences. Suzie, what's your answer?
I think yes. I think that we are contributing to shaping the future of how companies navigate continuous change. So it's back to the balance between achieving meaningful business success and thoughtful leadership.
I think I agree with Suzie. I think yes. I think that we are rewriting the rules. And I think actually, if you take a step back, we've come a long way. You couldn't even wear trousers when I joined Deloitte in 1995, and it's quite nice to be able to choose what I want to wear now these days. But I think that we are rewriting the rules. I think we've come a long way, but I do still think there's a long way to go. And I hope that men and women listening to this pick up on, a few of the areas and think about how they can support in helping those rules to be rewritten so that we're in a more, equal environment.
Well said. Suzie and Katie, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
You're really welcome. I've loved it.
Great to meet you.
Thank you both very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrott, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.